The scar on her palm had faded from pink to silver over 7 years, and Riven traced it every morning the way other people checked the weather. Not because it told her anything useful, but because it was there, and she was still here, and some days that was the only math that added up. 7 years since the Coldwater Massacre. 7 years since she had shifted. Her wolf was not dead, but she knew that the way you know a tooth is still in your jaw even when it stops hurting, by the absence that has a specific shape, a specific weight. Something was there, it simply refused to answer. It was mopping the corridor outside the Ironveil Pack's infirmary when she heard the news. Not officially. Officially, Omegas below the threshold rank were not told things. They absorbed information the way old stone absorbs rain, through cracks, over time, passively and without acknowledgement. "The Warden is coming," said one of the junior healers to another, passing so close to Riven that the hem of his coat brushed her bucket. He did not look at her. People rarely did. She kept her eyes on the floor. The Warden. Cassian Vale, High Arbitrator of the Northern Accord, sovereign authority over the 7 mountain packs that formed the spine of the Canadian Rockies. A man who had ended the Coldwater Massacre not by arriving in time to stop it, but by arriving afterward, identifying the rogue faction responsible and dismantling them so thoroughly that their name had not been spoken aloud since. She knew his name the way everyone in the Northern Packs knew it, imperfectly, in pieces, assembled from overheard conversations and the particular reverence that people reserved for things they feared, but could not do without. She had never thought she would see him. People like Riven did not intersect with people like that. She changed the mop water and kept moving. Ironveil's infirmary was the oldest part of the compound, built when the pack was still a way station rather than a settlement, and the walls held cold the way old wood holds old arguments, stubbornly, without resolution. Riven had worked here for 4 years. Before that, 2 years in the kitchens. Before that, 1 year sleeping in the storage room behind the boiler because she had nowhere else to go, and the pack's threshold system did not recognize her as anything that required housing. She was not a prisoner. That was the thing. People on the outside never understood about packs like Ironveil. You were not imprisoned, you were simply not considered. The meal rotation included her name in a category at the bottom, below the line that separated functioning pack members from legacy dependents. A legacy dependent was the administrative term for a wolf with no active wolf, a shifter who did not shift, a member who did not contribute to the pack's collective strength, a person who existed in the record books the way a decimal point exists in the middle of a long number. Technically present, structurally irrelevant. She ate what was left. Most nights it was enough. Some nights it wasn't, but she had learned over 7 years to tell the difference between hunger and the particular hollow ache that was something else entirely, grief wearing the shape of an appetite. The scar on her palm, the wolf that did not answer, the Coldwater Massacre, which had taken everyone she had come to Ironveil with. She kept the bucket moving. By noon, the compound had shifted into a register she had never heard before. A frequency of collective anxiety that expressed itself in the way people walked faster, spoke quieter, checked their appearances in reflective surfaces without appearing to notice they were doing it. The senior warriors had changed into formal coats, the dark charcoal wool that Ironveil reserved for council visits and death ceremonies. The administrative staff had produced tablecloths from somewhere. Someone had cut spruce branches and arranged them in a clay pot outside the main hall, and the smell of pine resin carried all the way to the infirmary corridor, sharp and clean above the antiseptic. Riven noticed all of it the way she noticed most things in Ironveil, peripherally, without being noticed herself. She was scrubbing the infirmary's back counter, the one that held the surgical instruments, and the tremor started. It was not an earthquake. She knew that immediately. It was too localized, too internal, a vibration behind her sternum that she felt in the cartilage of her ribs and nowhere else. She pressed her fist against her chest and held it there, breathing carefully. Nothing. Or not nothing. Something. The suggestion of something, so faint she could not be certain it was real, and not the particular cruelty her body performed sometimes in the early hours, a mimicking sensation just long enough to remind her what she was missing, and back to scrubbing. The warden's convoy arrived at 2 in the afternoon. She heard it from the corridor, the gravel displacement of multiple vehicles moving in formation, then the particular silence that fell over a crowd that was trying to appear less impressed than it was. She had no reason to go outside. Omega's below threshold did not attend official arrivals. She had a counter to finish and a floor to sweep, and a shelf of medications to reorganize, because the pack's head healer had asked her to do it yesterday, and she hadn't had time. The tremor came back, stronger this time. Not a suggestion, a push, a pressure behind her ribs like a hand pressing outward from the inside, and Riven set down her cloth and stood very still in the middle of the infirmary and tried to breathe around it. 7 years. 7 years of nothing, of silence, of a wolf that had packed itself into whatever the smallest possible space was inside her, and gone completely quiet. And now this. Now, while she was reorganizing a medication shelf in a pack that considered her a decimal point, something was moving. She did not mean to go outside, but she meant to stay exactly where she was, to press her fist against her chest until the sensation faded, to do what she had always done, which was to make herself very small and very still, and wait for the disruption to pass. Instead, she walked down the corridor through the back door of the infirmary and into the compound's eastern courtyard, and she stopped there in the grey October air, with her cloth still in her hand. The courtyard was crowded, Elaine Vale's senior members arranged in the loose formation that passed for ceremony here. Not military precision, but the organized deference of a pack that wanted to appear more functional than it was. The warden's people stood at the entrance, a disciplined knot of wolves in black, with the stillness of people who had done this many times, and found nothing in it that surprised them. But in the center, speaking with Ironveil's regent, was a man she had never seen but recognized in the way you recognize weather, not by looking at it directly, but by the change in the air around it. But Cassian Vale was not what the stories described. The stories described a strategist, a cold intelligence wrapped in authority, someone whose decisions arrived like winter, inevitable, impersonal, affecting everyone equally. Those things were true, she thought. She could see them in the way he stood, in the precise economy of his attention, in the manner in which he allocated his focus the way a person allocates a limited resource, deliberately, without waste. But the stories did not describe this, the specific quality of his stillness. He stood in the center of a crowded courtyard, and he was the only person in it who was not, on some level, performing. Everyone else was demonstrating something: competence, deference, relevance. Cassian Vale simply stood, and the courtyard organized itself around him the way water organizes itself around stone. His eyes were grey. She noticed that from 30 feet away, which meant they were a particular kind of grey, the kind that caught light and held it, like ice on a river, like quartz in granite. He turned his head, not toward the regent, who was mid-sentence, not toward his own people, turned toward the eastern edge of the courtyard, toward the narrow gap between the infirmary wall and the old spruce that had grown into the compound's foundation over 80 years, where a woman in work clothes stood holding a cleaning cloth with her fist pressed against her sternum. He looked at her, and Riven felt the wolf inside her, the wolf that had not made a sound in 7 years, rise up against her ribcage like a tide. It was not graceful. It was not the bond she had read about in the old accounts, the gentle recognition, the warmth spreading outward like sunlight. It was a collision, a wall of sensation hitting her all at once, heat and pressure, and the overwhelming, disorienting certainty that she was standing in the wrong place relative to something she needed to be closer to, and her entire body had decided this simultaneously. and without consulting her. A wolf pressed against the inside of her with a force that made her take a step backward. Cassian Vale had gone very still in a way that was different from his ordinary stillness. She watched him process whatever he was experiencing with the controlled discipline of a man who had spent his life managing things that were larger than what most people could handle. His jaw tightened. One hand closed briefly at his side. The Regent continued speaking, and Cassian let him finish the sentence and then, quietly, without raising his voice, said something that stopped the Regent mid-breath. "Who is she?" Not a question, a direction. The Regent followed Cassian's gaze, and the color in his face changed. She watched it happen from across the courtyard, watched him go from pink to something closer to chalk. "That is, she's one of our threshold dependents, Warden. A legacy case. She lost her wolf 7 years ago in the Coldwater incident. She works infirmary maintenance. She's not part of the receiving party. I apologize, I'll have someone. Her name? Riven Ashby." Cassian was already moving. Riven did not run, but she considered it. There was a moment, a very clear moment, where her feet assessed the available directions and her body prepared to choose one of them. But the wolf inside her had a different opinion entirely, and the wolf was, for the first time in 7 years, loud enough to override everything else. He stopped 2 feet from her, close enough that she had to tilt her chin up to meet his eyes, and up close the grey was not cold at all. It was the grey of storm clouds from the inside, lit from within by something moving. He looked at her the way she had seen people look at things they had spent a long time believing were gone. "You're cold," he said. It was not what she expected him to say. She glanced down. Her hands, she realized, were shaking. The cloth was still in one of them. She had been working since 5 in the morning, and it was now past 2, and she had eaten a bowl of oatmeal at 6 that was mostly water and grain. And she was, now that she thought about it, quite cold. "I'm fine," she said. Something moved through his expression that was controlled and sharp and directed somewhere behind her, at the compound that had designated her a decimal point. "And did you last eat a real meal?" "I had breakfast." "What was breakfast?" She didn't answer, because the answer would not improve the situation. His gaze went to her hands, the scarred one, the shaking one, and then back to her face. And the thing in his expression sharpened further into something she recognized, despite never having been on the receiving end of it, the particular anger of a person who has found evidence of a wrong they cannot immediately correct, but intend to. He turned slightly toward the Regent, who was still standing at the center of the courtyard with the frozen quality of a man who understood that whatever had just happened was going to require extensive documentation. "We will continue the review inside," Cassian said. "But first." He turned back to Riven. "Come with me." "I have a shelf to reorganize," Riven said, and she had absolutely no idea why she said that, except that 7 years of threshold life had built grooves in her that were deeper than instinct, and the groove that said complete, the task ran very deep. Something shifted in his face. Not softness exactly. The architectural suggestion of softness, like a structure that knows it contains the possibility but hasn't committed to it yet. "Shelf," he said, "will still be there." He did not take her hand. He waited, a precise, deliberate wait that offered her the choice without pretending the choice was anything other than what it was. And then she fell into step beside him, and they walked across the courtyard, past the staring pack members and the recalibrating warriors and the Regent, whose expression had moved fully into the territory of a man assembling a legal defense, was brought to the guest quarters. The good ones, the ones she had cleaned last Thursday, the ones she had scrubbed the windows of while standing on a step stool and thinking about nothing in particular. The cedar oil smell was still faintly there. Cassian spoke to someone outside the door in a low, rapid voice, and within 20 minutes food arrived. Not the threshold-level food. Real food. Roasted meat, bread that was still warm, root vegetables in a broth that smelled of rosemary and black pepper, A glass of something dark red that she identified by smell as cranberry, and something fermented and slightly sweet. "Eat," he said, and stood by the door the way a person stands guard rather than the way a person stands watch, and Riven understood the difference. She picked up the bread. Her hands were still shaking, and she hated that. Hated the evidence of how far down she had let herself go, or how far down she had been taken. She had not entirely worked out which, but she could not control the shaking, so she ate around it. The bread was warm, and there was actual butter on the plate, salted, the kind she had not tasted in years, and she had to close her eyes for a moment because the flavor was overwhelming, in a way that had nothing to do with the food, and everything to do with what the food represented. "Slowly," Cassian said from across the room, and his voice had changed. Not softer exactly, but differently calibrated. The way you recalibrate when the thing in front of you is not a problem to solve, but a person to not startle. But she ate slowly. She ate all of it. When the glass was empty, she set it down and looked at him and said, "You felt it too." "Before I crossed the tree line," he said. He had not moved from the door. "The wolf has been present since I entered the valley, present than is comfortable. Mine has been quiet for 7 years, I know." A pause. "The Coldwater Massacre. You were there." "I survived it. There's a difference." She pressed a palm flat on the table, the scarred one. "My parents didn't. The people I came to Ironveil with didn't. I was thrown clear when the first structure collapsed. I came back and everything was on fire, and my wolf just stopped, like a switch." He was quiet for a moment, with the particular quality of silence that is not the absence of response, but the presence of one still being assembled. "How many times has Ironveil's healer assessed you?" "Twice. The first time he said dissociation. Trauma response, the wolf retreats, it comes back. The second time was 14 months later, and he looked at me for a long time and said he couldn't find it." She had told this story so many times in her own head, and never out loud, and the telling of it now felt strange, like using a muscle she had forgotten she had. "After that, I stopped being on the active member role. Below the threshold, legacy dependent." Cassian's jaw tightened. "The wolf is not gone." "You can't know that." "I can." He pushed off from the door and crossed the room, and she did not flinch, though she noted the precise moment she decided not to, crouched in front of her chair. The Alpha King had knelt, she thought distantly, and this man crouched, and the effect was the same, this large, careful person making himself level with her, as if her eye line was the most natural reference point in the room. "May I?" He held up his hand. She nodded, pressed his palm to her sternum, flat, steady, radiating a warmth that went through the fabric of her shirt and spread into her chest like the first real heat after a long cold. And her wolf, her silent, absent, switched-off wolf, surged upward toward his hand with a force that knocked the breath out of her. His eyes changed. The grey went darker, deeper, and she saw his wolf looking out at her through them, not threatening, not aggressive, but absolutely focused in a way that made the back of her neck prickle with something that was not fear. "There," he said quietly. "Your wolf is not gone. It's compressed, wound tight. Something, or someone, wound it down so far that the ordinary assessment can't reach it." He removed his hand, and the cold rushed back, and her wolf strained after the warmth the way a plant strains after light. "I've seen this once. A wolf whose power was so far beyond the pack average that it had to be suppressed to survive in a pack that couldn't contain it. That's not, I'm threshold level. I'm below threshold. I have no rank because I have no wolf. You have no rank because Ironveil's ranking system was built for wolves it could measure." He stood. "What it can't measure, it classifies as absence." She stared at him. "That's a significant claim about someone you've known for 40 minutes. 32 minutes, he said. "And I have spent the last 20 of them with my hand on your sternum, feeling something that should not be possible in a wolf that lost itself to grief." He looked at her steadily. "Your wolf did not leave you. Your wolf chose to become small enough to survive here. There is a difference." She thought about the tremor, that had pulled her out of the infirmary. The 7 years of specific, shaped absence, the way the healer had looked at her the second time, not with the confidence of someone diagnosing nothing, but with the discomfort of someone failing to diagnose something. "I need to speak to your regent," Cassian said. "Stay here. Eat if you're still hungry. Someone will stand outside the door to guard me or contain me. To ensure," he said, "that no one in this compound has the opportunity to make you feel like a decimal point again before I've finished explaining to them why that was a significant error in judgment." He left. The door closed behind him. Riven sat in the chair and looked at the empty plate and the window beyond it, which showed the courtyard she had scrubbed clean last week. And she thought about wolves that wound themselves small enough to survive, and mothers who sang old songs, and the particular weight of absence that has a shape. She did not sleep. She went to the window. The courtyard below was where Cassian was speaking to the regent, and she could not hear the words, but she could read the bodies. The regent grew smaller by degrees, not physically, but in the way that authority compresses under the weight of a greater settling. Cassian spoke. The regent's hands came up once in something between argument and supplication. Cassian spoke again, quieter, and the regent went very still, in the way that people go still when they understand the conversation has moved past the phase where their input is being solicited. She stepped back from the window before he could look up. There was a knock. Not Cassian's knock. She knew his footsteps already, which was both alarming and somehow entirely natural, like knowing the sound of weather before you see it. This knock was lighter, faster. "Miss Ashby." A voice she didn't recognize, one of his people. "The warden has asked whether you'd be comfortable speaking with his field healer." She opened the door. The woman outside was compact and dark-haired, with the kind of face that suggested she had personally verified most of what she knew. "I'm Petra," she said. "I'm not here to assess you, but I'm here to tell you what I think is happening, if you want to hear it." Riven stepped back to let her in. Petra sat in the chair Cassian had occupied and folded her hands on her knees in the manner of someone about to say something they've rehearsed for accuracy rather than comfort. "Your wolf is genuine. It's present. I can feel it from here, which means it is very large and very contained. And the containment is so thorough that your pack's healer was not lying when he said he couldn't find it. He was measuring in the wrong units. What does that mean? It means your wolf is not an Ironveal scale wolf. It's not a threshold wolf. It's—" Petra paused, choosing words. "You know the Accord bloodlines, in the way everyone knows them, vaguely and not well. The Northern Accord was not always a governance structure. It began as a kinship system, 7 families, 7 territories, with 7 wolves with the kind of power that could hold the mountain packs together, rather than letting them fragment. That bloodline has been diluted over 3 centuries. Occasionally, it resurfaces." She looked at Riven directly. "Your parents, their names were Holt and Brennan Ashby. Your father was a border enforcer. Your mother worked in the Coldwater Pack's medical records." "Is that right?" "Yes. Your mother had a particular gift. She could calm distressed wolves by touch. Any wolf, any level of distress. It was noted in the Coldwater Pack records in a minor administrative footnote, the kind of thing that gets noticed only after the fact." Petra was quiet for a moment. The Accord bloodline carries 3 traits: healing by contact, a calming effect on other wolves, and a shift so powerful it requires management from childhood to prevent it from surfacing before the body is ready. The room was very quiet. "She would put her hand on my chest," Riven said, "when I had nightmares." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. The nightmares would just dissolve. "She was managing your wolf," Petra said gently, but without softening the sentence, but keeping it from coming through before you were ready. And when she died, the management didn't collapse, it held. Because your wolf had been taught, over years, to wait, to stay small, to endure. The scar on Riven's palm caught the window light. She looked at it. "It's been waiting," she said. "Not a question. for something strong enough to call it forward without it tearing through you in the process. Petra stood. Be the Warden. After Petra left, Riven did not sit down. She paced instead, the length of the room, heel to toe on the thick rug, trying to locate something in herself that was stable enough to stand on. The wolf in her chest was louder than it had been in 7 years, and it was getting louder, and the thing she kept returning to was not the bloodline, or the inheritance, or the Accord legacy, or any of the large things that should have been occupying her. The thing she kept returning to was her mother, at the edge of her childhood bed, hand pressed flat to Riven's sternum, humming something without words, and the nightmares dissolving like salt in warm water. She had thought for 7 years that the silence was loss. She understood now that it was protection. The distinction did not make the 7 years shorter, but it changed what they had been for. Cassian came back at dusk. He looked like a man who had been having a very specific type of difficult conversation for several hours, which was because that was what had happened. Ironveil's regent has been placed under administrative review, he said. Pending formal investigation by the Accord Council. My people will oversee the Pack's operations until the review is complete. The threshold system has been suspended effective immediately. Riven looked at him from across the room. You can do that. It falls within Warden jurisdiction, yes. The Pack won't. The Pack will adjust. He said it without cruelty, just with the particular confidence of someone who has had this argument before and has a very good sense of how it resolves. 7 wolves living below threshold. Infrastructure that hasn't met Accord standards in 6 years. A healer who classified an Accord bloodline wolf as absent because his assessment tools were insufficient. His jaw tightened in the way it did when his anger was present, but being held at the length he'd decided was appropriate. These are correctable things. I intend to correct them. She was quiet for a moment. And me. He looked at her. I think you know what I'm going to say. I'd like you to say it anyway. Your wolf has been silent for 7 years in a pack that could not contain it. The Accord bloodline doesn't stay suppressed indefinitely. It finds a trigger eventually, or it finds another way out, and without the right conditions around it when it surfaces, it becomes catastrophic. A pause. I am the right conditions. That's a very practical way to describe a mate bond. It's a very practical situation. Something shifted around his eyes. I can also tell you that I have been a warden for 11 years, and in that time I have maintained 6 pack alliances, and navigated 3 sovereignty disputes, and told approximately 400 people things they did not want to hear, and the only time in 11 years that I have walked into a courtyard and felt my wolf go absolutely still, and then absolutely certain, is in the last 4 hours. He looked at her steadily. Both things are true simultaneously. She pressed her palm flat against her own sternum, the old reflex, the 7-year reflex, checking for the tremor. It was not a tremor anymore. It was a tide. If you call my wolf forward, she said, and it comes, and it's what Petra says it is, I'll be there. You can't guarantee that. I can guarantee that I have held wolves in crisis in active combat situations, and I have not lost one. He moved toward her, not fast, not slow, the careful, deliberate pace of someone who has learned that what matters is not speed but intention. And yours is my mate's wolf. It will not hurt me, and it will not lose itself with me there. He stopped 2 feet from her. I'd like to try tonight if you're willing. There's a clearing half a mile north. My people will hold the perimeter. They haven't shifted in 7 years. I know. It's going to hurt. Yes. No softening of it, she appreciated that. But I think you have been hurting for 7 years, and a different kind of hurt, one with an end, is worth considering. She thought about the infirmary corridor, the mop water, the bottom of the meal rotation, the way her name appeared on the Ironveil records in the category below the line, as a legacy dependent, as a decimal point, as a presence that the system had decided was technically there but structurally irrelevant. Yes, she said. The clearing was ringed by old growth spruce, the kind that had been here long enough to remember what this valley had been before any pack claimed it. The ground was October soft underfoot, a carpet of fallen needles that were damp from the afternoon's rain, and the cold had a clarity to it, the particular sharpness of mountain air in the hours before dusk that made everything smell more like itself than usual, the resin in the bark, the minerals in the nearby creek, Cassian's scent, which was spruce and something metallic and something warm underneath that she had no word for, but her wolf did. But she stood barefoot in the center of the clearing. She had taken off her shoes at the edge of the trees because the ground felt necessary. Cassian stood 20 feet from her. He had not shifted, watched her with grey eyes that were entirely his wolf's eyes in that moment, and the expression in them was not what she had expected. Not concern, not the careful clinical assessment she had seen him apply to everything else in the last 4 hours. Something older than assessment. It's something that had been waiting longer than she had. "Your instinct is going to be to hold it back," he said. "Don't. What if I can't control it when it comes? It's been controlling itself for 7 years," he said. "The first thing it will do when it's free is breathe." He stepped back. The air changed before he howled. She felt it, a pressure drop, a sudden crystalline quality to the atmosphere, as if the clearing had just become more itself. Then he threw his head back and the sound came, and it was not a sound in any ordinary sense. It was a frequency that bypassed her ears entirely and went directly to bone, to marrow, to the locked room inside her where her wolf had been sitting in the dark for 7 years, patient and enormous and furious and terrified and alive. The howl did not knock on the door. It took the door off completely. Riven went to her knees in the pine needles. The pain was white and absolute, and she felt it in places she did not know pain could be located. The hinges of her jaw, the soles of her feet, a place behind her sternum where her wolf had been compressed into something the size of a held breath. Her bones were moving. She could feel them, the reorganization of her own structure, spine lengthening, skull reshaping, and the pain was extraordinary. And beneath the pain was a feeling she had forgotten the word for: relief. A shift came out of her like 7 years of held breath, all at once, not in stages. A detonation of light and muscle and something that was not quite either. A radiance. The wolves at the perimeter would later say that they had seen from inside the tree line with their backs turned and their hands over their eyes. The wolf that stood in the clearing where Riven Ashby had been was not what any of them had been prepared for. It large, larger than any wolf they had seen outside of the Warden himself, which was saying something, with fur the color of old snow, the grey-white of a high mountain glacier that caught the last light and seemed to generate its own. Her eyes, when she opened them, were amber, a deep warm amber, and they looked out at the clearing with the specific quality of something that has been waiting a very long time and finds the wait, now that it is over, to have been almost worth it. A black wolf was already there. Cassian had shifted, and his wolf was dark and enormous, and he stood between his people and the glacier wolf with every line of him communicating something that was not aggression, but was absolutely not neutral either. A claiming, a presence, a declaration made in body language rather than words. The glacier wolf looked at the black wolf. The black wolf looked back, and the glacier wolf walked, with enormous, deliberate paws, across the needle-carpeted ground and pressed her forehead against the black wolf's jaw. And the black wolf made a sound that the perimeter team would not discuss afterward, because it was too private to have witnessed. Riven was split in half, or rather in two. Human mind in a wolf body, 2 systems running simultaneously on the same hardware, and it was disorienting in the way that joy is sometimes disorienting, in that it exceeds the container you'd been keeping it in. She could smell the creek 1/2 mile north, and the composites of Cassian's scent that she had already begun to categorize without deciding to, and the cold metal smell of the mountain itself, and beneath all of it the mate bond, which had been humming for 4 hours, and was now no longer humming but roaring, settled into place like the last piece of something very large finding its angle. And she shifted back. She was on her knees in the pine needles and shaking so hard her teeth chattered, and Cassian was beside her with his coat around her shoulders before she had fully processed that he was there. The coat was enormous. She buried herself in it. "Your wolf," he said, and his voice was not entirely steady. She looked at his hands and confirmed that they were not steady either. "Riven, your wolf is—" "I know," she said. You could feel it. Glacier wolf. He said it like someone reading an entry in a record they had believed to be historical rather than current. The Accord founding line, the first Warden's bloodline. He looked at her. "You're a direct descendant. My mother used to hum an old song." Her voice came out rough and cracked and real. She never finished it. The ending was always missing. He pulled her closer, both arms this time, her head against his shoulder, and she let him because the alternative was remaining upright on her own, and she had spent 7 years doing that and could take a night off. "The Accord archive has the full song," he said, "recorded 300 years ago from the last glacier wolf. Your direct ancestor." A pause. She walked into the northern range alone and was never found. His archive always assumed she died out there. Maybe she chose to disappear. Maybe she chose to survive, he said, and trusted that something of her would find its way back. The clearing was quiet except for their breathing, and the distant sound of the creek and the barely audible shifting of the perimeter team, very professionally staring at the tree line and not at their warden, holding his newly discovered mate in the middle of an old-growth spruce grove at dusk. "I'm not going back to the threshold," Riven said into his shoulder. "You are not. I'm not going to be a symbol." "You already are one," he said, not unkindly. "You don't have to perform it. But the glacier wolf reappearing in the northern range after 300 years of absence is not a thing I can prevent people from noticing." She thought about that. "And you? What do you get from this?" He was quiet for a moment, long enough that she looked up. "Get the person," he said, "who walks out of a compound infirmary to investigate a feeling she's had for 7 years, still holding a cleaning cloth. Something around his eyes. I get someone who told me she had a shelf to reorganize. I get—" He stopped. "I have been a warden for 11 years. I have negotiated with people who wanted things from me every day for 11 years. You looked at me across a courtyard and your first instinct was to go back inside and finish your work." He looked at her. "Do you know how rare that is?" She did not have an answer for that. She filed it away instead. "Come back to the compound," he said. "Not to the threshold quarters, the guest wing that I cleaned last Thursday. I know. It smells like cedar oil." He stood and offered his hand, and she took it, and he pulled her up with the careful steadiness of someone who intends to keep doing that for a long time. They walked back through the trees in the dark. At the edge of the clearing, one of the perimeter wolves, Petra, it turned out, had found Riven's shoes and set them on a rock, which was the kind of small practical consideration that Riven had not received in 7 years, and which made her throat close unexpectedly. She put her shoes on. She walked back through the dark spruce forest beside the warden of the Northern Accord, wearing his coat, her wolf running alongside her own footsteps just below the surface of her skin. Warm and immense and finally awake. The compound was changed by morning, not physically. The buildings were the same, the corridors were the same, the infirmary was the same, but the register had shifted, the frequency of the place recalibrated around a new center of gravity. The threshold system had been suspended. The 7 below-line pack members had been assessed, fed properly, and offered options. The other 6 were in the infirmary, being evaluated by Petra with an attention to detail that their previous healer had never applied. 3 were considering Cassian's offer of relocation to the Accord's primary settlement, Black Vale, where the Northern Pack system ran on different rules. 2 were staying. Riven was one of the ones staying. Temporarily. She had conditions. She laid them out at the administrative table, where Cassian's people were conducting the Iron Veil Review, which was not the conventional venue for a newly bonded mate to negotiate the terms of her future, but which suited her exactly, and which seemed to suit Cassian as well, given the way he had arranged 2 chairs at the table rather than 1. I want access to the Accord archive. The full records, but not the curated ones available to PAC members. I want the history of the Glacier bloodline done. I want to finish the veterinary certification program I started before Coldwater. Iron Veil has a practitioner track. I want to be enrolled in it with full standing, not as a threshold dependent. I want the other 6 given whatever they need to make a real choice about where they go. Not a choice between staying below the line and leaving with nothing. Already in motion, as he looked at her across the table. Are those the conditions? Those are the first conditions. Something shifted in his expression, that almost warmth, the architectural suggestion of it. I'd expect nothing less. She looked at him, the grey eyes, a scar that ran through his left eyebrow from some previous conflict he had not yet explained. The particular quality of his attention when it was directed at her, which was the quality of something that had chosen its direction and did not intend to re-choose. She thought about 7 years of below-the-line existence, of absence, of the particular endurance of a wolf that had learned to wait. She thought about her mother's unfinished song. "One more thing," she said. "Name it." "The song in the archive. The Glacier Wolf's song." She pressed her palm flat on the table. "The scarred one, the one she traced every morning. I want to hear the ending." He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached across the table and covered her hand with his, not the assessment of the previous evening, not clinical, simply contact, warm and deliberate and unhurried. "I'll take you there myself," he said. But outside, the October morning was coming in grey and cold through the compound windows, and somewhere in the PAC's upper quarters, one of the other 6 was eating a real breakfast for the first time in longer than she would say, and the Regent was in his office with 2 Accord officials explaining himself into a record that would become part of a formal case, and Cassian's perimeter team was rotating out of their overnight positions in the organized quiet of people who had done what they came to do. Riven's wolf moved just below her skin, unhurried, finally warm. Somewhere in the northern range, in an archive carved into the granite of a mountain that had held this territory for 300 years, a song waited with its ending intact. She would get there. She had learned, over 7 years, that waiting was not the same as lost. She had learned in the last 14 hours that found was not the same as finished. She picked up her coffee, real coffee, from the guest wing, not the watered-down version from the threshold kitchen, and she listened to the mountain settle around her, and she was not cold.